Chapter 51. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Kill. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. Pretty Weiwei was indeed a lucky girl. Ling Pingyan had received a message as soon as she opened the treasure box. Your teammate Pretty Weiwei opened the Rose Gold treasure box. You received 10,000 point certificates of Nightmare. You obtained the Princess Pestilence's determination. You obtained the corpse remnants of the plague embryo. You obtained the Book of Pestilence, incomplete. There were only a few items in the treasure box, but every one of them shone with a purple glow. Ling Pingyan read through the attributes of the items and instantly realized that he had made a fortune this time. The Princess Pestilence's determination was a legendary accessory. Although it didn't increase the points of any attribute, it had 3 special effects. The first special effect was that you had a certain chance to make the enemy contract a random infectious disease during a strike. The second special effect guaranteed that each attack would exacerbate the enemy's condition if he had already caught a disease. The third special effect provided that the enemy would immediately become a plague zombie with 10 life points if he died from the disease. The plague zombie would randomly attack enemies and explode in 3 seconds. He would also cause 10 points of splash damage to enemies within a 3-meter radius and increase their chances of contracting the same infectious disease. By reading the description of these special effects, Ling Pingyan knew that this piece of equipment was very useful. With these, he wouldn't need to worry about getting crappy scores from commoners anymore. As for the corpse remnants of the plague embryo, it was legendary-grade nightmare material. According to its description, it could be used to forge magical weapons, add to high-level medicine as an efficacy enhancer, or be included in some special ceremonies. Nevertheless, the last item, the Book of Pestilence, incomplete, seemed really quite strange. Book of Pestilence, incomplete. Grade. Legendary. Material. Skin of Evil Dragon of Hell. Description. This is an incomplete book obtained by Alucard, the Blood River Overlord, from an unknown nightmare world. The book documents knowledge of pestilences and curses. There was nothing else about the book. Ling Pingyan didn't have a clue what the book could be used for. While he was puzzling over the book, Pretty Weiwei suddenly sent him a request saying, "Master, can you please sell me the corpse remnants of the plague embryo?" She chose her words cautiously and said, "I know that this might be too much to ask. But that it's really important to me. I will give you all the point certificates I have. I know these are hardly enough. That's why I can sign a contract with you notarized by the realm of Nightmare that I will give you all the point certificates of Nightmare I earn in the future." Ling Pingyan laughed as he heard her plea. He sent the corpse remnants of the plague embryo to her straight away. It was only a game. Ling Pingyan's primary concern had always been having a good time. He didn't care about the equipment or coins. After all, why would he need those things if he didn't have a good time? On the other hand, there was no use for them if he did enjoy himself. 1,000 gold coins spent, more would turn up. This had always been Ling Pingyan's motto. He only wanted to have fun. Besides, this female player was truly lucky. Therefore, Ling Pingyan also sent her a friend request when he gave her the corpse remnants of the plague embryo. "We should vanquish demons and monsters another time since fate brought us together," said Ling Pingyan. At this moment, his gaming system was counting down already. 10, 9, 8. "Thank you so much." Chu Weiwei was overwhelmed with excitement when she stared at the thing in her Mark of Nightmare. It looked like a slab of meat and emitted a purple glow. Corpse remnants of the plague embryo. Grade. Legendary. Material. Blood and flesh. Description. This is the plague embryo Alucard, the Blood River Overlord, failed to develop. Instructions. You can raise it into a real state and throw it in any volcano. This will completely destroy the rest of Alucard's arrangements. The corpse remnants of the plague embryo would basically solve the problems of the Beizhou kingdom. Nevertheless, Chu Weiwei still didn't know who this so-called Alucard, the Blood River Overlord, was. She also didn't know how he'd used the nightmare world to affect real life and cause disease in all the cattle in the Beizhou kingdom. Despite that, Chu Weiwei understood that she had to put an end to Alucard's evil plan now. Otherwise, the Beizhou kingdom might lose more than cattle in the future. A diverse group of players of the nightmare game was carefully exploring the dense forest. Based on common sense and their experience, a nightmare mission usually would last several days or even months. And the death rate of the players of the nightmare game might exceed 50%. Sometimes a whole team could be wiped out in a nightmare world at the most difficult level. Therefore, no one dared to take it lightly. So far, they were only lingering around the spot where they'd first appeared. It was necessary. Because they didn't know anything about this world. In addition, this was the first nightmare world that had opened after the dramatic change of the realm of nightmare. No one would joke around with their own lives. I heard that everyone inside died when the realm of nightmare was going through the changes. A man with dark-colored skin squatted in the grass and asked the people around him, "Have you heard if anyone survived?" All of them shook their heads. "I wonder what kind of changes made us lose our connection with the entire realm for a whole hour," the man continued. At that moment, he received a message in his mark of nightmare. Moradon the Princess Pestilence had died. The history of the nightmare world of Pestilence was about to change because of the death of Moradon the Princess Pestilence. This nightmare world mission was over. Settling the current nightmare world mission, everyone was alarmed immediately. They stared at each other, wondering what on earth had happened just now. A sharp-witted man started to shout, "Realm, I request to use the pardon for nightmare." A sonorous voice answered, "Request granted." The man's body gradually became transparent. The rest of the group only figured out what was going on at that point. They had made zero contributions to this world. In other words, they would be considered as losers based on the rules of the realm of nightmare. To what end would someone who failed a mission come? Everyone screamed in fear. "Realm, I request to use the scroll of forgiveness for nightmare. Realm, I request." But it was too late. The settlements of the nightmare world are over. The sonorous voice once again reached everyone's ears. "Your requests are denied. The system has determined that you failed the main nightmare mission. You made zero contributions to this nightmare world. Kill." One by one, their heads exploded. Their bodies fell on the floor of the forest in the dead of night. A bright moon was shining in the starry sky above the forest. A couple of vultures landed on the ground, scavenging. They approached the bodies with caution, then pecked at the flesh contentedly. More and more vultures arrived. They devoured the last bits of the bodies. Chapter 52. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This game supports AFK. Translator. Nyo iwo Studio Editor. Nyo iwo Studio Ling Pinyin noticed that his body was flying higher and higher. Soon, he left Earth's atmosphere and entered outer space. Nav OM. At this moment, a message box popped up in front of him. Lines of words became visible in the box. You have finished your exploration of the nightmare world of plague. Your performance evaluation. Champion. You destroyed this nightmare of a world on your own. You put an end to a sinister conspiracy on your own. You saved the entire world. A series of scenes started to flash before his eyes. He saw the moments when he'd first entered the forest, when he was in Nanan village, and when he'd eventually shattered the giant Princess Moradon with one blow. This flashback ended on the frame in which he stood in the rain of flesh and blood coming from Princess Moradon. New messages rolled on the screen. You have received 30,000 point certificates of nightmare. Base reward. 10,000 points plus champion reward. 10,000 points plus nightmare destruction reward. 5,000 points plus savior reward. 5,000 points, you have earned 3 discretionary gold attribute points. Please distribute them at your discretion. You have gained 1 entry ticket to the Golden Nightmare Lottery. You can use the lottery ticket when you log into the game next time. Notes: the plot of Alucard, the Blood River Overlord, was ruined because of you. You killed Moradon, the Princess Pestilence. As a result, Alucard, the Blood River Overlord, considers you as his archenemy. As a result, Duke Ivy of Hell considers you as his archenemy. Ling Pinyin shrugged his shoulders while reading these messages. He cracked a smile and said to himself, interesting. Interesting. The NPCs in this game held grudges against players. That was a brilliant design. Ling Pinyin clicked on his skill bar and checked out the 4 skills that had all been activated. He chuckled and said to himself, I'm looking forward to seeing how capable you are if you dare to bear a grudge against me. 2 NPCs. Such puny creatures. You're designed to be my treasure boxes. All 4 skills in his skill bar were lit up. The first skill was Almighty Dragon of Heaven, the second one was Buddhist Hymn, the third one was Venerable Xitigarbha of Hell, and the ultimate skill was Supreme Wisdom of all Buddhas. It almost seemed too good to be true when the 4 skills were used together. Ling Pinyin could feel the excitement surging in his heart when he read the descriptions of the 4 skills. He was itching to play a few more rounds in other instance zones and earn more point certificates, so he could raise the level of the 4 skills. For that reason, he asked the system, how do I start a new game? He received this answer. Sorry, dear player. The server of Legend of Nightmare hasn't finished testing and debugging. Therefore, we only allow 1 exploration of the game per week at this time. However, you can choose to pay 30,000 point certificates of Nightmare and activate the Away from Keyboard (AFK) function for your character. Your character will explore the world freely and continue to play according to your settings when you're away from the keyboard. You will receive all the proceeds gained during the AFK period when you log into the game again. Ling Pinyin frowned in concentration. I can only play once a week. He complained to no one in particular, no wonder your game is not a hit. Nevertheless, he still decided to activate the AFK function. Thus he spent the 30,000 point certificates that he'd just earned on the AFK function. Soon after, a new box popped up before his eyes. The box was full of options. Dear player, your character is considered by the system as a law and order role based on your choices and behaviors in the last Nightmare world. You can choose the logic and code of conduct for your character during the AFK period. Ling Pinyin grinned after reading this message. It works this way. He said to himself, it looks as if the artificial intelligence technology of the Federal Empire is truly advanced. Then he focused on answering questions and checking boxes in order to delineate his character. Chu Weiwei opened her eyes. She discovered that she was lying on the bed in the dorm that had been assigned to her by the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Beizhou Kingdom. She got up, put on her slippers, walked to the window, and opened the curtains. The dazzling night view of Xianan burst into her sight. Neon lights flashed all across the city. Countless cars flowed in streams in the streets. Chu Weiwei also saw several young people laughing and frolicking on a street corner in the distance. She exhaled, sighing, and took out the jade casket she'd gotten from the Realm of Nightmare. It was a storage casket that she'd bought in the Realm of Nightmare with 1,000 point certificates of Nightmare. According to the instructions that came with it, anything inside of the casket would be completely protected from the outside world. Right now, it was holding the corpse remnant of the plague embryo she'd obtained in the Realm of Nightmare. She carefully opened the jade casket. Chu Weiwei saw a disgusting lump of flesh. All sorts of strangely shaped bumps were growing on the flesh. Even though Chu Weiwei had only opened the jade casket a tiny crack, an awful stench permeated the air. Chu Weiwei only took a quick glimpse before shutting the jade casket swiftly. It looks just like what I imagined. She whispered to herself, this thing immediately changed its appearance when it came to the real world. The corpse remnant of the plague embryo had been only a chunk of colorless flesh in the realm of nightmare. But now it had immediately transformed into this stomach turning thing after it was brought back to the real world. I must follow the instructions and take it to the volcano to destroy it as soon as possible. In order to take the corpse remnant of the plague embryo out of the realm of nightmare, Chu Weiwei had spent almost all of the tips that she had gained from selling her equipment. She had had to sell several pieces of silver-grade equipment to scratch up enough point certificates of nightmare. Thank goodness she'd obtained the nightmare milestone. Coattail Rider. Otherwise, she would never have had enough funds. Because Chu Weiwei had had to spend 30,000 point certificates of nightmare to buy the corpse remnant of the plague embryo from the realm of nightmare. She'd also needed to pay a surcharge in order to take it out to the real world, which brought the total price to 50,000 point certificates of nightmare. Chu Weiwei couldn't afford that no matter how hard she tried. Nevertheless, she'd received a message from the realm of nightmare just when she was feeling most downhearted. Because you achieved the silver-grade nightmare milestone. Coattail Rider, you will be ranked higher than a commoner in any nightmare world. As a result, you can get a random identity and a matching discount every time you trade with the realm of nightmare. Chu Weiwei took a chance and drew a ticket. Much to her surprise, she'd been exceptionally lucky to get the identity of the Princess Nightmare and a 70% discount, one time only. With the help of the discount, she'd finally scraped up enough point certificates and took the corpse remnant of the plague embryo out of the realm of nightmare. I was still relying on the monk in the end. Chu Weiwei sighed. From start to finish, I've always been a freeloader. In spite of feeling sorry for herself, Chu Weiwei didn't forget she needed to take action. She took out her phone and dialed a number, then she gave an order to the person on the other end of the phone, prepare a helicopter right away. Her innocent, timid face instantly turned stern and serious when she was on the phone. Just do it. She didn't leave any room for bargaining, and she hung up the phone. The Chu family from Qinqing Mountain had accumulated an unimaginable amount of wealth and resources during the past 300 years. Chapter 53 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Neighbors Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio Ling Pinyin quickly went through all the options. He'd checked all the boxes he needed to check within 5 minutes. Noel.n because he didn't need to think too hard about any of the questions. He simply selected the options that seemed just and moral. As a law-abiding citizen of the Federal Empire, Ling Pinyin didn't forget about the values of the Federal Empire, even in the game. Equality, friendship, benevolence. After Ling Pinyin had finished and submitted all the selections, another message box appeared. Dear player, you can now choose to write and edit the background story of your character in Legend of Nightmare. Or, you can let the system randomly assign a story for your character. Ling Pinyin scratched his head. He had a strong urge to utilize his creativity. Nevertheless, I haven't come up with an idea for my new book yet. So he chose to let the system make up a story about him. Instead of staying to see how the story played out, he clicked on the Exit Game button. Ling Pinyin raised his head and discovered himself sitting behind the counter. He was still holding the phone in his hand. The watch that had been stuck on the back of the phone had already come off. He looked up and glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 1:30. It's been over 2 hours. He clicked his tongue and reminisced about the wonderful feelings he'd had in the game and said, such an amazing game. I need to thank the guy who sent me the invitation code. He picked up his phone and logged into WeChat Red. He found Northern Winds and sent him a private message, dude, thanks a lot. Then he started to think about what to eat for lunch. It actually wasn't a hard question. He only had 3 choices. Beef noodle soup, rice bowl with braised beef, or rice bowl with pork ribs. After a moment of hesitation, he picked rice bowl with pork ribs and immediately placed the order. At this moment, he heard someone knocking on the door. A young woman in her early 20s was standing outside of the door. She looked shy and bashful. Ling Pinyin stepped forward, opened the door, and asked, "Hello, how can I help you?" "Hello." The young woman was also very polite. She bowed to Ling Pinyin and said, "Sir, I'm Aunt Wang's niece from the laundromat around the corner." "Oh." Ling Pinyin cracked a smile and said, "Come in, please." Although he had never seen her before, she was practically his neighbor since she was Aunt Wang's niece. As the saying goes, a neighbor close by is better than a relative far off. The modern lifestyle in the city had destroyed the old-fashioned sense of neighborhood and community. Many people never even said hello despite living next door to each other. They didn't know anything about their neighbors' jobs, personalities, or family composition. A faint smile was the most they would offer when meeting in the elevators. The situation was not that bad yet for the street Ling Pinyin lived on. At the very least, he knew his neighbors' names. Everyone was willing to lend a hand to their best ability if anything unexpected happened. "Thanks, but I don't need to come in." The young woman seemed timid and nervous as though she didn't have much experience in interacting with people. She lowered her head and said, "My aunt asked me to come here and pick up the clothes. May I ask where your clothes are?" Ling Pinyin slapped his own forehead and laughed. "Look how forgetful I am. Wait here for me. 2 minutes. I will get the clothes for you right away." He turned around and hurried upstairs. "Okay." The young woman nodded vigorously. She looked at the strange man climbing up the stairs. And she remembered what the chief had said to her before she came here. "Little Un, you have worked here for 6 months, right? Is everything going well? The Federal Empire has an important task for you. Are you willing to contribute to the Federal Empire?" Subsequently, she had been assigned to this neighborhood even though she didn't fully understand what was going on. Because her aunt ran a laundromat in this area. The chief had called her directly. As a result, she had come to this seemingly ordinary bookstore to run an errand for her aunt. The young probationary sergeant of the Blackguard was ruminating, how is it a federal task to pick up clothes for a laundromat? She didn't understand. This bookstore couldn't seem more ordinary to her eyes. The young probationary sergeant saw a kitty lying on the counter in the bookstore. How beautiful. The young woman was attracted by the cat right away. Not many girls could resist the soft fur, wide eyes, and delicate figure of a cat. She wanted to step in and pet the cat. However, she stopped right as she was about to take a step forward. Before she'd come here, the chief had warned her repeatedly that she couldn't step into the store without a prior order, let alone touch anything in the store. Although the young woman didn't understand the purpose of such prohibitions, as a blackguard, she was trained to obey orders before she'd even taken on the job. At this point, she heard footsteps coming down the stairs. The young man was holding a big bag of clothes. "Thank you very much." He politely handed her the bag and said, "I will send the money to Aunt Wang right away." "Okay." The young woman nodded, picked up the bag of clothes, and bowed again as she was leaving. Meow. She couldn't help but turn her head when she heard the cat. She saw the cat jump on the ground. Then the cat lowered its head and rubbed its cheeks against the man's legs. How adorable. The young probationary sergeant of the Blackguard felt like her heart had almost melted. Holding the bag of clothes, and Xiao Xiao returned to the laundromat that her aunt operated on the next corner. But it was not her aunt who was waiting for her in the laundromat. It was a group of serious-looking officers from the Blackguard. The head of the group was Lieutenant Colonel Xia Ping, the chief of the Guangnan precinct of the Blackguard. "Where are the clothes?" The normally reserved chief jumped on Xiao Xiao the moment she'd returned. "Here." And Xiao Xiao handed him the bag she was holding. Xia Ping took it and carefully placed it in a box made of leaden plate. As a lieutenant colonel in the Blackguard, Xia Ping was a fairly high-level official in the Guangnan district. Nonetheless, he sealed the box himself, lifted it with a few co-workers, and carried it out through the back door of the laundromat. A military vehicle of the Federal Empire had been waiting there for a while. After placing the box inside the car, Xia Ping turned back to An Xiaoxiao and barked out his orders: "You can't discuss anything that happened today with anyone else. And you can't make contact with that bookstore owner without my permission or instructions. You must report to me as soon as possible if the owner of the bookstore calls you. This is an order." "Yes, sir." An Xiaoxiao saluted and nodded solemnly. Chapter 54. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Amazing Old Clothes Translator. Nyo I.Bo Studio Editor. Nyo I.Bo Studio. The Federal Armed Forces Laboratory was located on the southern outskirts of Jiangqing City. Zheng Jing had been staring at the laboratory apparatus in front of him for more than 2 hours. He was like a young man who had finally started a relationship with the girl he'd always adored. He didn't want to be apart from the instrument for even a second. It's so gorgeous. Such an elegant trajectory. Such a perfect activity level. This is exactly what I have been looking for. As long as I can figure out its regular pattern. One of the Federal Distinguished Service Medals will have my name on it. At this moment, Zheng Jing felt like he was back in the days when he was a young man. He was full of energy. He couldn't stop working. The Federal Empire hadn't eased up on research on the spirit aura and the psionic power ever since the spirit aura had been revived. Unfortunately, it had been 200 years up to this point. People still didn't know how foreign species and transcendent beings brought themselves back to life again. Almost no two cases were the same. Everything was occult science. The awakening of the foreign species and transcendent beings was an occult phenomenon. So were the spirit aura and psionic power. Theoretically, the spirit aura tides could occur any second after the spirit aura was revived. Psionic power that could be absorbed by foreign species, transcendent beings, or even common people could appear in the air, water, and food at any time. However, most of what comprised the spirit aura and psionic power were inert substances. They remained inactive in most situations. They had extremely low activity levels even when mixed with catalysts. Active psionic power could only be detected in the bodies of foreign species and transcendent beings. Nevertheless, these substances that were active in their bodies would quickly start to decay like radioactive materials once they got out. In general, the half-life was as short as a few seconds. In normal conditions, the active psionic power would become lifeless in less than a minute. This characteristic had been a big roadblock for all the researchers. If they couldn't observe the active psionic power in a stable condition, they couldn't possibly conduct any research on it. It would be a wild daydream to put it to practical use. Yet now, Zheng Jing had found his fire starter. This psionic power had been extracted from leftover food and disposable chopsticks and spoons in a plastic bag. It was identical to the psionic power extracted from other places in terms of structure and substance. However, its activity level was more than 10 times higher than psionic power from other sources. On top of that, its half-life was significantly longer as well. Based on the current data gained through observation, this psionic power could last for hours. This was virtually a miracle. This psionic power acted as though it had been aligned with some matter that had tremendous radioactive energy. It was like the nuclei that were produced and ejected in the merger of two neutron stars. Or energy matter that had escaped from a white hole. If I could see this thing with my own 2 eyes, Zheng Jing exclaimed, that I could die right now without regret. For scientists, not being able to solve a problem when they were so close was the cruelest thing in the world. It was almost like torture. Imperial Scholar, a research associate, came up to him and whispered, "General Situ sent some other stuff over and asked us to examine it." "Where is it?" Zheng Jing jumped to his feet at once and shouted impatiently, "Where is it? Take me to it quickly. I will examine it myself." Soon Xing Jing received the box made from leaden plates welded together. He opened the box and saw a bag of clothes inside. There were about a dozen pieces of dirty clothes that looked like they had been sitting there for several days. Xing Jing's eyes sparkled the moment he saw these clothes. He picked them up and went into the lab right away. A half-hour later, this renowned Federal Empire expert on psionic power walked out of the lab with his eyes wide open. Impossible. How is this possible? These are clothes that have never gone through any special treatment. Scholar Zheng, Situ he hurried to ask Xing Jing, is there a problem with the clothes? Much more than a problem. Xing Jing gripped the hand of this major general of the blackguard with great excitement and said, all of these clothes have the same level of protection capability against psionic power as a Type A vestment. You probably wouldn't be able to penetrate them even with an all-out strike. Where on earth did you find these? Xing Jing stared at Situ He with fire in his eyes. He might be able to find an explanation for the psionic power that he had extracted from leftover food and disposable chopsticks and spoons in a plastic bag. But what had happened to these clothes was completely beyond comprehension. These were only clothes made with common fabric. Xing Jing was familiar with the labels on the clothes. They were all casual wear produced by well-known companies in the Federal Empire. Their price was fairly low as well. The most expensive piece was still less than A. However, these ordinary clothes. The same kind of clothes that everyone in the Federal Empire wore every day. For some inexplicable reason, they possessed the same level of protection against psionic power as a Type A vestment. Type A vestments were the best kind of equipment that could remain impregnable even when facing the Major General of the blackguard. The entire Federal Empire hardly produced any Type A vestments each year. Because only the finest experts could make vestments at this level. Their time was limited and precious. They wouldn't make vestments simply for fun. Most emperors of the Federal Empire only had a handful of informal suits and ceremonial robes made from Type A. But now, a dozen pieces of cheap clothes had the same characteristics and protection capability as Type A vestments. They also had the same half-life as the psionic power extracted from the leftover food. If it hadn't been for the food, Xing Jing could almost have been inclined to think that the commander-in-chief in the capital might have spent years making these seemingly ordinary clothes merely because he was bored. However, there was no evidence to suggest that anyone had cast spells on these clothes. Xing Jing couldn't find any trace of magic art either. In fact, they looked exactly like the clothes that were manufactured on an assembly line in a factory and eventually bought by a random customer. Still and all, these unremarkable clothes displayed remarkable protection capability during the tests. Xing Jing had used all kinds of equipment, large and small, to assess their defense and response capabilities. The results showed that almost all the magic art simulated by the equipment was powerless when trying to attack these clothes. It was an eye-opener for Xing Jing. His knowledge and experience had no way of explaining either the phenomenon or the reasons behind it. Scholar. Situ he noticed Xing Jing's expression. He tapped Xing Jing on his shoulders and refrained from saying anything more. This thing is a top secret of the Federal Empire. Sorry, but I can't say anything more unless I have authorization from the Emperor and the Commander-in-Chief. Xing Jing was not too disappointed. He nodded and replied, I'm too eager. But. He stared at Situ he and said, I hope you can permit me to head to the capital at once. That's not necessary. Situ he said. The Commander-in-Chief will be coming to Jiangqing City very soon. You can go to see him yourself when he comes. Situ he looked at Xing Jing and said no more. He'd already conveyed his message clearly. Chapter 55 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Over translator. Nyo I.bo Studio Editor. Nyo I.bo Studio, Ohio. The little miss from Fusang who rode around on her electric scooter was exceptionally happy today. Ling Pingyan could see the smile on her face and feel her happy aura even from a great distance away. Today, she looked like a flower that was blooming in the summer sun. Ling San, here's your pork cutlet with rice. She placed a plastic lunchbox on the counter in front of Ling Pinyin and then bowed and said, Ling San, did you know? I've obtained the status of permanent resident in the Federal Empire today. Congratulations, Michiko.chan. Ling Pinyin was happy for her. It was rather difficult to obtain permanent residence in the Federal Empire. After all, the population of the Federal Empire had grown to more than 2 billion. There were just too many people in the world. With a population on such a scale, the Federal Empire ranked first in the world in areas like energy consumption, as well as in the consumption of meat and grains. Ling Pinyin was worried about whether prices of items would rise on the mainland now, even though the hoof-and-mouth disease was centered in the Beizhou Kingdom. Oh! Ling Pinyin opened the lunchbox and was immediately surprised. Michiko.chan, I only ordered the pork cutlet with rice. Doviko, why is there so much food? He couldn't believe his eyes. This was because there was not just one serving of food in the lunchbox. Aside from the pork cutlet with rice that he had ordered, there were also a few smaller compartments in the lunchbox containing pieces of sushi. There was also a bowl of kabayaki, which made him hungry just looking at it. This lunch looked way too lavish. Did you bring me the wrong order, Michiko.chan, he asked. No, Chiba Michiko said happily. This is because our shop has received funding and support from the Fusang Delicacy Promotion Research Association. It is for citizens of the Federal Empire like you, Ling San, so that you can gain a clearer understanding of how delicious and varied Fusang delicacies are. From today onward, our shop will be throwing in a few free food samples with every order. This is because we want to foster friendly relations between the Federal Empire and the Fusang Kingdom. Please do not turn down our goodwill, Ling San. The little girl took a deep bow after she'd finished speaking. So, if that's the case, Ling Pinyin scratched his head. He had never heard of the Fusang Delicacy Promotion Research Association, but he could guess the deplorable business methods that the so-called Fusang Delicacy Promotion Research Association were using. Undoubtedly, they were first dragging people into a trap by using free stuff, then attempting to profit from it later. This was a business practice that arose during the mobile internet era. Investors loved stories and pie charts. As long as the story they were told was good, they didn't care how much they had to spend a year to nurture the market. Thinking about this, Ling Pinyin expressed his congratulations to Chiba Michiko happily. Congratulations, Michiko.chan. Who doesn't like free stuff from investors? Ling Pinyin especially wanted to say this on behalf of all consumers. The more of these kinds of investors, the better. Ling Pinyin sent off the joyful Fusang lady, then immediately opened up the box of food. He rubbed his hands together. What should I eat first? All of the food looked delicious. At the far end of the street, in a security booth, a camera had been aimed at the young girl from Fusang who had just walked out of the bookstore. The target has walked out of the bookstore. An army officer whose job was to constantly keep track of the images in the surveillance hall spoke into a radio device, repeat, the target has walked out of the bookstore. On the surface, there is nothing strange about the target. Repeat, there is nothing strange about the target. Roger. Situhi's calm voice came from within the radio device. Tell the men on the ground to not give the game away, everything has to be done with the utmost secrecy. To the Federal Empire, spending a little money in wasting a restaurant selling Fusang food was trivial. Thus, Situhi had used his authority and gotten an organization under the blackguards to establish contact with the restaurant managed by the aliens from Fusang. Then, through the injection of funds and the reputation of the Datong Party, he could easily make these law-abiding Fusang refugee families believe that this was a plan to promote Fusang delicacies that the Datong Party had come up with. Naturally, he easily obtained their full support. That was extremely important. This way, he would be able to obtain even more extra samples when he collected the trash the next time around. The only problem was What would he do with the clothes? The Major General of the blackguards of the Federal Empire could not help but slip into deep thought. This was not only because he was angry that he was unable to determine if his target would discover his trickery or not. More important, even if the target did not discover his actions, what excuse could he give to the target so he would believe why his old clothing had been destroyed every time he sent it to the laundry? Situ he could not help but slip into deep thought. A heavy-load helicopter circled in the air as it slowly descended onto the Guangling volcano, the largest volcano in Xinjiang state. This was a super-volcano. According to geologists, this volcano had once had an intense eruption roughly 70,000 years ago. The substances it released had covered the greater half of the Beizhou Kingdom's sky. However, it had been dormant for 70,000 years. There was not even smoke visible now above the crater of the volcano. Chu Weiwei looked at the calm lake of magma after the helicopter had descended. "You guys can leave now." She jumped out of the helicopter as she instructed the people inside, "Come and fetch me when you receive my call." "All right." The driver of the helicopter agreed. He lifted the massive object and gradually took to the skies. Chu Weiwei looked at the helicopter as it flew away. She looked toward the horizon. A hint of crimson had appeared. It's about to be daybreak, she walked toward the volcano. It's about time the nightmare of Beizhou woke up. She took out the jade box from the mark of nightmare. She stood at the mouth of the volcano and raised the jade box. She had established a connection with the realm of nightmare through the mark of nightmare. "Realm, I'm applying to destroy the corpse remnant of the plague embryo in the real world." The power of the volcano was not enough to destroy the plague embryo completely. Even if it were just the remnants of the corpse. This was something that she'd found out after she'd obtained the corpse remnant of the plague embryo. More accurately, the item was merely a catalyst. The volcano was also just a medium. The realm had to take action for her to achieve her aims. Code name Pretty Weiwei, are you sure that you want to destroy the corpse remnant of the plague embryo completely? A magnificent voice rang out. Yes. Chu Weiwei said with determination. Your application has been approved. Participant Pretty Weiwei of the Nightmare game, you can now toss the corpse remnant of the plague embryo into the magma to destroy it completely. Chu Weiwei exhaled deeply. She released the jade box in her hand and dropped it into the lake of magma that was several hundred feet deep. Patter. There was only a slight splash. However, the entire lake of magma quickly started to boil. A horde of spore-like objects started to grow from the lake of magma. Countless wisps of contorted black smoke struggled and howled within the boiling magma. Finally, they gathered and formed a weird humanoid shape. It seemed to be about to crawl out of the magma. At this moment, Chu Weiwei saw a giant hand made of magma reach out from within the lake of magma. The hand grabbed onto all of the black wisps of smoke and then clenched its fist tightly. Everything shattered. Chu Weiwei heard something that sounded like the strings of a stringed instrument breaking. Crack. Green smoke arose from the lake of magma before rapidly scattering into the surrounding air. At this moment, the sun rose in the east. It gave the world light and heat. The large hand made of magma shattered into balls of scorching magma before falling back into the lake. Countless splashes could be heard as the balls fell into the lake. Chu Weiwei knew that everything was over now. Chapter 56. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Inner World Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. After doing nothing for the entire afternoon, Ling Pingyan suddenly remembered that there was something he hadn't completed yet. So he found himself a small shovel and climbed onto the roof. He scooped up some soil from the corner of the roof and placed it in a plastic pot. Then he carefully buried the pit of the delicious peach that he'd eaten yesterday into the soil. He then turned around and pulled down the fly of his pants and urinated into the pot. You have to grow quickly. Ling Pingyan told the plastic pot. He was filled with anticipation. He was already imagining the scene where this pit grew to become an enormous peach tree that bore lots of fruit for many years. He carefully placed the plastic pot by the side of the wall under the eaves. He then walked into the building and closed the door. His footsteps faded as he gradually got further away. It was already past 5 in the afternoon. The sun was getting ready to set in the west. The sunlight landed gently on the roof of the building. It hit the plastic pot through the gaps in the fence around the roof. Under the radiance of the sunlight, little green tender leaves stuck out of the soil. They couldn't wait to emerge and enjoy the nourishment of the sunlight. Ring. The phone rang. Situhi immediately picked up the phone. Situhi here. Yes. The commander-in-chief has cancelled his trip here. Because something happened in Beizhou. Understood. I know, I'll make the necessary preparations. Tell the commander-in-chief not to worry. Situhi's eyes were filled with confusion as he placed the phone down. There was a huge piece of news from Beizhou. The hoof-and-mouth disease that had stumped even the plague specialists of the Federal Empire, the livestock scientists, and the blackguards had undergone a complete reversal. Workers there had found that large batches of infected livestock that were about to be put down humanely had recovered completely. They'd also ascertained information through their autopsies and samples. The strange phenomenon on the samples that had stumped everyone had vanished without a trace. Then, the plague workers of the Beizhou Kingdom also noticed that the plague transmission in the various territories of the Beizhou Kingdom seemed to have paused. It seemed to have come to an abrupt stop. The sudden change elated many people, but it also caused many others to worry. This was because no one knew if everything was over, or if a new calamity was about to unfold. Because of this, the central federal government had had no choice but to send the commander-in-chief to take the helm in Beizhou as a precaution. After all, there were about 200 million citizens of the Federal Empire in the expansive Beizhou territory. Of course, the commander-in-chief also had made arrangements for Jiangqing City. The Lieutenant-General of the Blackguards and the Grand Secretary of Internal Affairs, Zhang Hui, would come to Guangnan on a private plane to execute the trials and judgments. His plane would land at the Jiangqing airport in an hour. Zhang Hui's arrival made Situhi heave a sigh of relief. Within the Blackguards, the Grand Secretary of Internal Affairs had always been famous for his intelligence and resourcefulness. He might be able to find out about the background of the boss of the bookstore. Even if he failed to do so, there was a little bit of a buffer with him around. As he thought about this, Situhi started to prepare the material that he had gathered. Thump. Thump. His heart beat slowly but gradually recovered. The coffin that was made out of crystal slid open. On the walls, the ancient oil lamps started to light up one after the other. He opened his eyes. At the instant that he opened his eyes, the sound of a bell rang out from within the deep underground chamber. A moment later, a flurry of footsteps could be heard from above. Men and women dressed in white sacred clothes nervously arrived at the door of the underground chamber. Lord, a little girl took out a key and opened the door. She looked at the human figure who had stood up from within the coffin, then bent her knees in worship. You've woken up. Yes. I've woken up. He opened his arms. A set of silk robes automatically fell onto his body. He stepped onto the ice-cold floor and walked to the front of the group. Countless ferocious, blood-red eyeballs popped out from under the skin of his face. His body shook slightly from the pain. He could barely manage to control his body. Don't be afraid. He looked at the people in front of him who were trembling with fear. He smiled. Don't worry, this is because of the contract. I'll never harm you. Descendants of Van Helsing. Then he looked at the little girl and asked, You are this generation's Duke Rhine. The little girl nodded. Time passes so quickly, he bent over and picked up the little girl. Take me to the meeting of the Sacred Alliance, he said as he carried the little girl. Lord, a old priest took a deep bow and said, That have you forgotten? The Sacred Alliance was forced to dissolve 30 years ago. He froze slightly. The smile on his face turned rigid. That's right, the Sacred Alliance was forced to dissolve 30 years ago. All of a sudden he recalled this. His face became contorted in immense fury. Li Shi. He clenched his teeth. His entire body turned red. The rest of the people knelt down. They didn't even dare to raise their heads. The other side of the world. It was a place commonly known as the inner world. It was a place where dreams settled. A giant, strangely shaped tumor of meat grew in this land where countless dreams intertwined. There was a giant vessel-shaped object on the surface of the tumor that was entwined deep within the inner world. It was constantly absorbing various substances. A cocoon-like object was growing at the top of the tumor. It was gradually increasing in size. Finally, the cocoon broke open. A muscular human figure stepped out from within the cocoon. He looked at the countless dream worlds in front of him. He placed his hands together and softly recited a Buddhist mantra, Amitabha. Good karma. Good karma. He then took out several decorative items. He moved his large hands slightly as he continuously twisted and sculpted with those items. Finally, he transformed those items into a golden monk staff. He then took out a golden book. He grabbed the book with immense force. The book started to burn. When the book had been burned completely, a bronze bowl appeared in his palm. He then took out several clothes that shone with various colors of light from the wasteland. He crumpled these clothes into a ball. Finally, a purple monk's robe appeared on his body. He raised his head and brought his hands together once again. He had a serious expression, Amitabha. Monk Fahai was born during the year 2821 and entered monkhood when I was 10. I learned under Zen Master Jinghui in Fayan Temple. I've finally finished my studies and can now exterminate demons in service of all life. While he was speaking, countless leech-like creatures manically dug out from within his body. These creatures opened their ferocious, terrifying mouths. They released a pitiful, horrifying cry like an incubus deep within a dream. This made him look extremely eerie. Half of him was sacred, the other half evil. These two forces intertwined and finally fused into his body. Thus, he carried his monk's staff, bronze bowl, and monk's robes and entered the dream world. Chapter 57. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A situation translator. Nyo iwo studio editor. Nyo iwo studio. Ling Pinyin lay back on his chair and patted his full stomach. He lazily scrolled through his phone and chatted about everything under the sun with his friends in a chat group. Have you all heard? Someone in the group typed mysteriously, today, in the Kingdom of France in the land of Qin, ghost soldiers appeared in broad daylight. I was flirting with a girl beside the Kaiser Gate and had just managed to pick her up when I saw the souls of an ancient army from 200 years ago. They carried a military flag and sang army songs as they walked through the city. All of the citizens of the Kingdom of France have gone insane. Ling Pinyin couldn't help but laugh when he saw this message. He typed a response, is there a photo? Yes, countless people took photos that day. I took a picture also, the person replied. But there was nothing there when the photo was developed. It was very eerie. Ling Pinyin shook his head and thought to himself, it's the same old trick again. Unfortunately, I'm no longer 8 years old. Things like the Bermuda Triangle, the Loch Ness Monster, or aliens in Beijing. They don't fool me any longer. Ling Pinyin was just about to exit the chat when he saw a portrait start to move on his notification tab. Ling Pinyin immediately sat up straight when he noticed that. He then tapped on the portrait and read the notification that the other party had sent him. Green Bean. Pinyin, are you fooling around? Green Bean was his chief editor. Pinyin. No, Ling Pinyin vehemently denied it. Using his screen name, he typed a response. Pinyin. Chief editor, you have to believe me. I never fool around. Green bean. Ling Pinyin knew that he had been exposed. He could only type again. Pinyin. Chief Editor, I wasn't fooling around. I've been searching for material and inspiration. His editor knew him too well. He immediately sent a reply. Green bean. You better come up with a good introduction for your book as soon as possible. Pinyin. All right. I'm on it. Ling Pinyin answered with confidence. Then he put down his phone and muttered to himself, I really have to think about what I am going to write my new book about. Writing novels was pretty interesting. He was proactive when it came to his writing. So he entered the Novel.Reading app. He started to look for novels that had ranked well on the platform. Studying the competition was crucial when it came to writing novels. A small official plane of the Federal Empire slowly landed at Jiangqing Airport. Situ He, who had been waiting for the plane for a long time, immediately stepped forward to welcome it. The door of the plane opened. A stern-looking man who seemed about 40 years old walked out of the plane. Secretary, welcome. The Governor-General of Guangnan, Wang Andao, was the first to step forward. He shook the visitor's hand saying, Please relay my loyalty and passion for the Federal Empire to the Emperor after you return to the capital. Even though the royal family of the Federal Empire had ruled with a laissez-faire policy for 200 years, the reputation and authority of the royal family were still immense. This was especially true over the passage of time and development through the eras. This world would always contain people who glorified the past. The Gonghe Party of the Federal Empire was the representative of these people. Coincidentally, Wang Andao's stance aligned with the Gonghe parties. You are too serious, Governor-General Wang. Zhang Hui nodded slightly. The attitude of the royal family toward the local government had always been the same during the last 200 years. Laissez-faire, after all, whether it was the central federal government or the local government, they were all voted in by the citizens of the Federal Empire. They were the representatives of heaven. While heaven consisted of all the masses. The emperor was the child of heaven. How could a child freely instruct and order his parents, the masses? Wouldn't that be unfilial? Zhang Hui did not overly engage in formalities with the local officials. He walked toward Situ He. The two of them shook hands, tightly. Secretary, Situ He loosened his grip. He handed Zhang Hui the bag of materials he had prepared. These are the relevant materials that I have prepared for you. All right. Zhang Hui didn't waste words. We can discuss this in detail in the car. Half an hour later, Zhang Hui had wrapped up all the formalities with local officials and got into the car Situ He had prepared. Sitting on the wide rear seats of the car, Zhang Hui took out the material from within the plastic bag and took a close look at all of it. He put down the material and said to Situ He, has the half-life been confirmed? Yes, sir. Situ He continued, Scholar Xing Jing has conducted accurate calculations and has confirmed that the half-life of the psionic substance was stable at 1 hour, whether or not it was obtained from clothes or trash. Its energy level would decrease by half every hour. 6 to 7 hours had passed. The psionic substance that we obtained from the everyday trash had returned to normal, the defensive capabilities of those articles of clothing had decreased to the level of a B.tier magic robe. Wow! Zhang Hui took a deep breath after he heard that. He knew what the implications were. It meant that the main body of the target was an unimaginable existence. The objects around him would be infected by the psionic power that he subconsciously gave off. Is there a way to slow down the reduction of this half-life? Zhang Hui asked. We are still testing, Situ He was rather confident about the matter. I believe that as long as we test enough samples, we will definitely find a way. All right. Zhang Hui nodded, then flipped through the relevant files. The target's parents were sacrificed in Kunlun State 14 years ago. His mother's younger sister became his guardian, until he graduated from university. Have you investigated his past actions? Zhang Hui asked. I have done a preliminary check of his teachers and classmates from university, high school, and elementary school under the name of research and investigation. Interestingly, most of the people I interviewed stated or answered that they do not remember him or that there might have been a person like that, but they could not remember as too much time had passed. Only a few people could tell me the target's name after I'd given them a hint. Oh. Zhang Hui did not understand. Is there a problem with that? There would be no problem if one or two people had said that, Situ he said. But there's definitely a problem if most of them said that. Zhang Hui nodded, then asked Situ he, would the fog that you spoke of be there tonight? I can't be sure. Situ he answered truthfully. I want to try it out tonight. General Situ, do you want to join me? Situ he shook his head in the negative. I don't think that we should alert the target. Because the target is too mysterious. He was still fearful when he thought about the scene that he'd witnessed last night. It's all right. Zhang Hui seemed very relaxed. We are going to have to establish contact with him sooner or later. To ascertain his attitude, as well as his likes and dislikes, Situ he had no choice. He could only nod. Then I shall do as you say. He did not know why, but he felt a little frustrated. No need to be afraid. Zhang Hui patted Situ he's shoulder. Since there is an explanation for the target's activities, he must have no ill intentions toward the Federal Empire and its surroundings. So we don't have to be too worried. Oh, yes. I almost forgot. Zhang Hui took out an invitation from his robes and handed it over to Situ he. My daughter is getting married on the 3rd day of next month. Please come and attend the ceremony if you are free, General Situ. Situ he took the invitation and nodded profusely. I'll definitely make it. Chapter 58. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The same technique won't work twice. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. Ling Pinyin became completely unaware of the passage of time as he immersed himself in the world of his imagination. When he looked up again, the clock on the wall was already pointing toward 10:00 o'clock. Time passes so quickly. But this author writes too slowly. I finished the novel in just 2 or 3 hours. Ling Pinyin stood up and stretched. He picked up his cup and walked over to the water fountain. He made himself another fragrant cup of tea. He then carried this cup of tea to the counter and started to drink it. Meow. Lying on the counter was a small cat who had seemed to be sleeping but had obviously detected the fragrance of the tea and meowed at Ling Pinyin. You want to have a drink too? Ling Pinyin scratched his head. He was confused. How would cats know how to drink tea? All right, Ling Pinyin's heart softened when he looked at the pitiful little cat. He took out a disposable cup and gave the cat half his tea. The cat immediately got up and extended its pink tongue into the cup. It licked up the tea, enjoying itself. Situ he stopped the car at the corner of the street. Through his car window, he could see that the shops on the nearby street had already closed for the night. It was already past 10:00 o'clock. According to his investigation, the shops that operated on that street were either selling everyday items or breakfast. Thus, it was normal for them to be closed at this hour. As he watched, the shops on the street were closing their shutters, one after the other. Soon the streetlights started to come on. It was silent. It was extremely silent. Indeed, Zhang Hui, who was sitting shotgun, observed the goings-on through the rear-view mirror. It seems very odd. The street in front of him seemed normal on the surface. However, then Zhang Hui took out a bottle of medicine and dripped some of its contents into his eye. What he saw now was completely different. The entire street seemed to lose its realism. Both the illuminating streetlights and the tightly shut shops on the silent street. Everything resembled stickers on the page of a book. However, to the average person, they were incredibly realistic. Zhang Hui didn't know if this was something intentional that the person who occupied the bookstore had orchestrated, or if it was a result of the contortion of the psionic power that he had unintentionally released. However, no matter what the reason, Zhang Hui knew that what he was facing was an existence that far exceeded his imagination. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Commander-in-Chief, after the call connected, Zhang Hui calmly reported that I've already arrived at the perimeter of the target location. Yes, I've used the medicine you created. Based on my current observations, I think that the situation is even more extreme than what we had previously thought. He seems to have contorted space. Time might even have been muddied by him. This is an unprecedented discovery. The blackguards had encountered similar situations to this. Once, at Mount Li, where the mausoleum of Emperor Qin was located. Space had been contorted and severed by a terrifying power. People who stepped into the area would frequently and unknowingly appear at a place thousands of miles or even tens of thousands of miles away. Finally, the situation had only been resolved after the commander-in-chief had personally stepped onto Mount Li. However, Zhang Hui knew that the commander-in-chief had been injured during that incident. But then the abnormalities at Mount Li had disappeared. The power that had contorted the space had been temporarily subdued. Thinking about this, Zhang Hui calmly said, I wish to step into the fog together with General Situ. To meet with the person. Don't worry, Commander-in-Chief, I will act with caution. Judging from the situation as reported by General Situ, there shouldn't be too much danger as long as I don't break his rules. Yes, Zhang Hui hung up. Then he turned to Situ He and said, General, do you remember how you entered the fog last night? Situ He nodded. Great. Zhang Hui said, then I'll have to bother you, General, so the two of them pushed open the car door and stepped outside. They walked to the edge of the street. Situ He immediately performed a hand gesture, stars on the terrace, flickers in the ever-changing causatum. Demons be exorcised, spirits be shackled, break the barrier, and expose the evil. He placed his palms on the ground. Two yin-yang fishes appeared on the ground. But the street in front of them did not react. Seeing this, Situ He cast the spell again in a hurry, stars on the terrace, flickers in the ever-changing causatum. Demons be exorcised, spirits be shackled, break the barrier, and expose the evil. This time, he only pressed his palms on the ground after he had taken a deep breath. The yin-yang fishes that appeared on the ground were much larger than before. But there was still no effect. There's no point in trying anymore. Zhang Hui stopped Situ He who was about to cast the spell a third time. He looked at the street in front of them. The shops looked like an oil painting that had been pasted onto this world. The streetlights that were illuminating the street looked even more like graffiti that had been scrawled by a child. It is clear. Zhang Hui said, General Situ, you only managed to go into the bookstore the previous time because the master of this space was not guarding against your barrier-dispelling technique. But now, the same technique won't work twice. Since that was the case, Zhang Hui knit his brows. If they could not even see this person, how could they communicate with him? Did they have to come during the day? Zhang Hui fell deep in thought. He had a premonition that there would be two different results if they met the person in the daytime rather than at night. Try this, Situ He took out a flashlight. It was the flashlight that he had asked for from Ling Pingyan the previous night. He turned it on. A bolt of light illuminated the area in front of them. The area in front of them immediately became hazy. It was as if a door had been opened or a visitor had pressed on the doorbell and received a reply from the master to enter. Fog. An endless fog appeared before their eyes. General, you have to take good care of your flashlight, Zhang Hui said seriously. That was a key. It might also be their safe passage. I understand. Situ He nodded. Let's go. Zhang Hui took a deep breath, then stepped into the fog. Situ he followed closely behind him. Gasp. Zhang Hui immediately noticed that something was off when he stepped into the fog. His senses had been suppressed. His senses had been suppressed completely the moment he stepped into the fog. More important, his psionic senses had been blocked completely. This meant that he had become an ordinary person in the fog. At this moment, even a few hooligans would be able to defeat him, a blackguard expert whose reputation had spread throughout the world and a lieutenant general who presided over the safety of the palace. Furthermore, the fog not only sealed off his powers. It also obscured his field of vision. He could not determine left from right. Fortunately, at this moment, the light from the flashlight fell onto his body. Secretary, Situ he walked up to him, please follow me. The flashlight shone in front of them. It made the fog in front less thick. He could finally see a path in front of him. Zhang Hui looked into the distance. He saw a flickering light wavering in the distance. That was the place where Situ he had been last night. It seemed like a place where an ancient deity resided. According to Situ he's report, it was there that he'd encountered unprecedented peril. It was also there that he had obtained the mysterious book, Ghosts and Souls. That's right. Zhang Hui suddenly said, if everything goes well tonight, come with me again tomorrow during the day, General. We'll have a look at the bookstore during the day. Chapter 59 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Spiritual Tea Translator. Nyo I.Bo Studio Editor. Nyo I.Bo Studio O. Ling Pinyin looked outside with surprise. He was confused. He didn't know why the street, which had just been illuminated by the streetlights, had suddenly become covered by a layer of fog. What's with the weather in Jiangqing City? He shook his head and walked outside to scope out the situation. However, the fog was too thick. The visibility was extremely low. He could barely make out what was only a few feet in front of him. Meow. The little cat cried out. Then it took hold of the corner of his trousers and pulled him backward. You're scared, aren't you? Ling Pinyin squatted down and picked up the little creature. Don't be scared. No one will harm you ever again. He was about to go back in the house with the creature in his arms. And suddenly he saw the light of a flashlight from within the fog, far away. Such a thick fog. But there are still people walking around in it. Ling Pinyin thought to himself, they must be people who had just gotten off the night shift. But are there factories like that nearby? He scratched his head. Jiangqing City had once been a city that was dominated by heavy industries. However, over the past 2 decades, with the rapid development of the internet, artificial intelligence and automation had started to proliferate within the city. The once labor-intensive business structures were no more. Could the workers who managed these streets have come to investigate the area, he thought. Sometime later, as the light from the flashlight got closer, Ling Pinyin saw the people who were coming out of the fog. He was startled, it's the old Republican from yesterday. And he's even brought along another person. He's a visitor who keeps his word. Ling Pinyin praised him. Indeed, my homeroom teacher from high school wasn't wrong. Everyone from the Gonghe party seems righteous. He walked forward with a smile. He'd forgotten about his judgment of the Gonghe party last night. Situ he walked forward, carrying the flashlight. Soon, he arrived at the bookstore. The light from the flashlight illuminated the area in front of him. A human figure appeared out of the thick fog. Situ he swallowed hard. He froze as he stared at this human who had appeared from out of the fog. He was carrying a small cat. Flickers of fire slowly flamed in the corners of his eyes. It was the owner of the bookstore. The fog was like his territory. The fog shifted around him. The fog around him parted automatically to form a path. Finally, the fog revealed his full appearance. If they hadn't looked up and had only seen the area under his neck, then this person looked no different from any other young person in the Federal Empire. He was dressed in casual clothes, the kind you could find in any cheap store. The shoes he was wearing were also normal sports shoes. However, it was this ordinary clothing and shoes that reminded Situ-He about the clothing that had been sent for testing. Every piece of his clothing had the defensive capabilities of an A-tier magic robe. In other words, even if the person did not move, Situ-He knew that he wouldn't be able to injure him even using all of his strength. "Visitor, you certainly keep to your word." The fog circled him like a servant following its master. It also seemed as if the fog was a soldier protecting its lord. He seemed to be happy to see Zhang Hui too, who was standing beside Situ-He. "Come in and have a seat inside." Situ-He looked at Zhang Hui. He realized that the expression of the palace's Secretary of Internal Affairs had also become nervous. There were some beads of sweat on his cheeks. Seizing the opportunity when the other party turned to go into the house, Situ-He whispered, "Secretary, have you managed to observe anything?" Zhang Hui shook his head. "He might be more troublesome than the worst-case scenario we have ever imagined," Situ-He said sternly. "If this is not handled well, there might be another Mountli in Guangnan." Gasp. Situ-He gasped. The underground palace of Emperor Qin at Mountli was the most troublesome incident that the Federal Empire had ever faced since its inception. Ultimately, it took the commander-in-chief getting injured in order to suppress the abnormalities in the underground palace. He then heard Zhang Hui say, "This isn't the unconscious Mountli, but a Mountli that has awakened." Situ-He's eyes bulged when he heard these words. It can't be, he knew what Mountli meant. It could be said that the world was facing its greatest danger. If the situation was not dealt with properly, the entire world might be faced with destruction because of this awakening. At this moment, in the bookstore on the other side of the thick fog, two blazing eyes looked out and shouted at them, "You two visitors, come in quickly." The thick fog slowly started to gather as a reaction to the voice. Situ-He even saw something glide past him in the fog. He glanced at Zhang Hui. Zhang Hui glanced at him. The two of them knew that the owner had given them an invitation. If they did not accept the invitation, it meant that they were not giving the owner any respect. Whether or not the owner would pursue the matter was another question. The creatures in the thick fog might act on their master's humiliation and settle the score with them. Situ-He quickly replied, "Coming." The two of them hurried up and walked toward the bookstore. The thick fog became a little more silent. Zhang Hui followed Situ-He to the entrance of the bookstore. Indeed, just as Situ-He had said, all of the restrictions and bindings vanished without a trace the moment they reached the entrance. Zhang Hui looked up at the sign hanging at the entrance of the bookstore. Something was flowing on the signboard. His powerful psionic sense seemed to have detected an eerie, evil murmur. It was as if something was faintly singing a strange, eerie song with an imperceptible tune under the bricks of the wall. Merely sensing these phenomena made Zhang Hui feel mentally unstable. His soul seemed to want to split apart. He quickly sealed off his psionic senses. At the same time, he formed a spirit, calming seal with both his hands and finally stopped the strange movements of his soul. "Please enter." The owner's greeting spread within the bookstore. At the same time, Zhang Hui heard the sounds made by the water fountain. Gurgle, gurgle. He looked at Situ-He. The two of them pushed open the door and walked into the store. "My kind customers, please have a seat." Standing by the water fountain beside the counter, the owner, who seemed to be holding a disposable cup, was pouring them a drink. Soon, 2 cups of hot tea were placed in front of them. "These are tea leaves that a friend has given me," he said. "It tastes quite good. Please give it a try." Zhang Hui and Situ-He looked at each other, then looked down at the tea that had been placed in front of them. Golden leaves were floating in the teacup. A powerful psionic power was emanating from the tea. The water in the cup was dancing with joy. Yes. The water was dancing. The water that was dense with psionic power was akin to a legendary ginseng fruit or heavenly peach. It had spiritual qualities. Thus, he understood that just this cup of tea might be able to solidify the core of his power. It made him even more confident of his push to rise to the rank of admiral. This was the divine medicine that the fables spoke of. Don't hold back. The owner of the bookstore said in a friendly manner, "My friend has given me quite a bit of tea." Yes, that friend is like you two customers. She also came to this shop to buy books. We're on good terms and she gave me some of these tea leaves. Zhang Hui and Situ He immediately became startled when they heard those words. This was information overload. Chapter 60. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Conjecture Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio, a customer, gave me those. Zhang Hui slipped into deep thought as he picked up the plastic cup. The leaves that were floating on the surface of the water had a golden radiance. Zhang Hui was certain that there were no such species of plants in this world. But that was not the most important thing. The most important thing was. He raised his head and looked all around at the bookstore. The floorboards were trembling slightly and creaking constantly. Rustles within the wallpaper were also clear to his ears. The ancient deity who seemed to have awakened was a little cat. It was looking at itself in the mirror. Zhang Hui nodded slightly at the cat as a sign of respect. The little cat meowed in reply. Customer, did you like the book you got yesterday? They heard Ling Pingyan, the owner of this bookstore and potentially an awakened ancient god, ask a question. I do. I do. Situ He replied in a hurry. I'm glad that you do. He sat down on a sofa across from them. He was holding something that looked like a teacup also as he said to Situ He and Zhang Hui, don't hold back, you too. Situ He picked up his cup now. He took a small sip of tea. Sweet. That was the first sensation that he had. Comfortable. That was how his soul reacted. He had only taken one sip, but Situ He felt that his soul had become more steady. Zhang Hui opened his eyes wide. In the past, he had always thought that miracle drugs were things that only existed in legends. However, he now finally knew that they were not legends. They were real. It was only that he hadn't been aware of these drugs, and he hadn't come into contact with them. Tasty, isn't it? The ancient deity sitting opposite them asked. Very. Situ He answered. Thank you, mister. Thank you for letting us try such tasty and wonderful tea. You're too polite. He picked up his cup and drank his tea. His head looked like a ball of fog. Other than the eye sockets, he had no other visible organs. However, he could drink tea like any other person. They did not know how he was drinking the tea. Zhang Hui and Situ He only saw him pick up his teacup and place it where his chin might be. Mister, Situ He swallowed. He decided to use conversation to divert this guy's attention. He was afraid that he might want to taste his flesh if he thought too much about the situation. This friend of mine, Situ He looked at Zhang Hui and continued, that he heard that you have several exceptional books. So he came here with me to have a look at them. What do you think about this? You're welcome to look around. He seemed very happy. He put down his teacup and looked at Zhang Hui. He asked, I wonder what genre of books this customer prefers. Zhang Hui thought for a while and chose his words carefully. He then said the first thing that came into his mind, Mister, what kind of books do you think I'd like? He pretended to be relaxed and laughed as he said that. However, he'd involuntarily placed his hands on the side of the sofa. In actuality, his stomach and legs were trembling. That was because he could clearly feel something in that instant that he'd uttered those words. Something was twitching on the cushions of the sofa underneath his buttocks. He could also sense clearly that something was sliding down from the ceiling above his head. A thick liquid was being secreted from the body of that object. That made Zhang Hui feel as though a person was pointing a gun to his temple. Ling Pingyan put down his teacup and stood up. He observed his new customer closely. This customer looked about 40 years old. He had the standard short hair that all the officials of the Federal Empire had. He was wearing a suit of formal attire that looked a little dated but was ironed to perfection, without any creases or stains. This kind of formal wear was an attire that had been promoted many years ago. It was different from the traditional office attire of the literati. Their new style attire had 3 pockets and lapels. This customer's clothes were very tailored and made the wearer look stern. This had been all the rage at some time in the past. However, as time passed, more and more young men felt that this attire was overly stern. Thus, this attire had been quickly relegated to being the attire only for civil servants or employees of major corporations. Not many people would wear it outside in private situations. He then thought long and hard about this new customer who had come this evening. Ling Pingyan could guess about the identity of the new customer without thinking too deeply. Birds of a feather flocked together. He would also be an old Republican. However, unlike the customer who had come in last night, this new customer must work in an organization of the Federal Empire or a national organization. He might even be a minor official. He could deduce that from the way the customer sat. However, his position was probably not too high. He could also deduce that from the way the customer sat. The customer might seem to be sitting up straight, but his body was involuntarily leaning to the front. This was an act of listening. It meant that his role might be one of carrying out policies or executing orders. A person like that was an executive within the corporation or organization. The level of an executive was historically not high in the Federal Empire. After all, a person who worked with his mind ruled over the people, while a person who worked with his body was ruled by others. Ling Pingyan had gotten a general understanding of these types of people after he'd thought a little about it. He smiled and said, "Sir, have you felt a huge amount of stress for a long time?" See, he was an executive after all. He was the person who took all the blame. He was not credited if things went well, but would be blamed if there were any problems. It would be odd if he was not under a huge amount of stress. Do you frequently have nightmares? Do you frequently dream of terrifying events? That was obvious. His supervisor would scold and rush him every day. From the start of the month to the end of the month. There would always be a mountain of work. He must have to work through the night after he returned home. He might even have to use his personal time to settle the personal problems of his supervisor. Even if he slogged away his life like that, the risk of being fired and replaced was always present. He was also at a very awkward age. He might still have parents that he had to support. He also had to provide for the parents of his wife. His friends and relatives might always feel that he had vast connections and could do almost anything. For his reputation, he might have no choice but to tough it out on many occasions. His children would be in a crucial stage like junior college or high school. He had to supervise their studies and especially take time out to coach them in their homework. He might even have to establish connections and ask for favors so that his children could go to good schools. He only wished to send his child to a good school under a good teacher in a good class. Thus, he had to use every means at his disposal to keep his job and position. He had to work hard at every moment to prove his worth. He could not let himself be eliminated. He could not let himself become a part that could be replaced. Under such pressure, it would be odd if he did not have nightmares and was not scared awake at night. Do you frequently think of obtaining something that you do not have, yet worried that you would lose the things that you have obtained? You always feel that you might make a mistake at something that you did, as Ling Pingyan continued to make his conjectures. The expression of the customer sitting across from him changed gradually. Ling Pingyan saw that and smiled. He said, "Customer, I know what kind of book you need. Please wait here for a moment."